No kidding. Right before the cameras started rolling, I looked down on this piece of paper. There's a bug of some sort. It looks like a ladybug, a stink bug, whatever it is. There it is on a piece of paper. Let's do some observational science. It has a red shell with black dots. It looks like it has about 8 legs. I'm guessing those are wings, and it can fly. Now, I can cut the thing open to a little dissection and tell you how the organs work. That is observational science. Let's try to do some historical science. How did that bug get there? I have no idea, quite honestly. For all I know, Adrian might have had it in his pocket. His daughter gave it to him earlier this morning, and he had it with, realized, got to get that out of there because don't want that going through, and he plopped it on there. How do you know that didn't happen? You don't. Maybe it flew in here. Maybe it made its way through one of these windows and it crawled down and it walked up the table and onto this piece of paper. Which one is it? Answer, I don't know. Why? Because I can't do science on those types of historical events. And yet, Bill Nye, in debating Ken Ham over the issue of creation versus evolution, couldn't quite seem to comprehend that distinction. And he toted out a bunch of evidence that frankly indicates that he is either not reasonable, or he's not intelligent, or he is lying. He brought out, this is just old, and this is just tired, and this is just very reasonably undermined the age of trees. How do we explain really old trees with a really young earth?
If we go to California, we find enormous stands of bristlecone pines. Some of them are over 6,000 years old, 6,800 years old. There's a famous tree in Sweden, Old Tico, is 9,550 years old. How could these trees be there if there was an enormous flood just 4,000 years ago?
Is Bill Nye a reasonable guy, ignorant, or lying? How do we date trees that are over hundreds of years old? It is not by tree rings. We need to use dating mechanisms like carbon-14 dating, which have been demonstrated and proven to be unreliable. That is proven. Now, if that's the case, that we don't have an accurate way to date those trees, we could conclude they're not actually 9,800 years old. Maybe they're less than 4,000 years old. That's very reasonable. Now, Bill Nye could research that just like I did and found it like that. Maybe he didn't, or does he know it and he's lying? What really is the issue? Several times Bill Nye said, I can't believe you use this English, this American English translation of the Bible to try to figure out what happened thousands of years ago. And yet, on his podium, this is a fossil of some sort of fish, I guess, that he toted out that's supposedly millions of years old. Here's his accusation. Hey, Ken Ham and you kooky creationists, you read some Bible that's been translated and you think you know what happened a long time ago. And what does he use to conclude his worldview? He interprets a rock. Now, I'm asking you, which transmission mechanism is more reliable, a book or a rock? But that is really the issue, and that is really what was seen in this little debate. It really wasn't about creation versus evolution. This is a war of worldviews. Let me share with you from Bill Nye his undermining, supposedly, of creationism. He tried to mock the idea of the ark because he couldn't imagine that these Neanderthals, Noah and the clan, could actually build a boat that big that would actually float. He just couldn't imagine it.
Inherent in this worldview is that somehow Noah and his family were able to build a wooden ship that would house 14,000 individuals. There are 7,000 kinds, and there's a boy and a girl for each one of those. So it's about 14,008 people. And these people were unskilled. As far as anybody knows, they had never built a wooden ship before. Furthermore, they had to get all these animals on there, and they had to feed them, and I understand that Mr. Ham has some explanations for that, which I frankly find extraordinary.
Are they extraordinary, or is he just not willing to be a reasonable man? Here's his conclusion. A couple hundred years ago, they tried to build a really big wooden boat, not even as big as the ark, and the thing it couldn't stay in the water, and so therefore, these idiots couldn't have built a boat. Is this reasonable? Those idiots were actually smarter than we are today? Possible, isn't it? They could have been smarter and they knew how to put it together so that it wouldn't actually leak or twist or break. How's about we haven't tried to build a boat that big because something came along that replaced wooden ships, metal, and now we do have boats much bigger. The Titanic was bigger than the Ark. We figured out a way to keep it afloat. Maybe Noah could have figured out a way, but it's really an intellectual superiority that would imply that those people were idiots and there's no way that that could happen. And no matter how reasonable the response from Ken Ham or creation Christians is, it doesn't get accepted by people like Bill Nye. Why? Because it's really not about the evidence. What it is really about is a worldview. Do I want to submit to somebody who made this place, or do I think that it just happened all by itself so I can suppress the truth and live any way that I want to? That's really what this debate was about, personified in Bill Nye's opening story.
My grandfather was in the Rotary, and he attended a convention in Philadelphia. And even in those days, at the turn of the last century, people rented tuxedos. And the tuxedo came with a bow tie, untied bow tie. So he didn't know how to tie it, so wasn't sure what to do, but he just took a chance. He went to the hotel room next door, knocked on the door, "Excuse me, can you help me tie my tie?" And the guy said, "Sure, lie down on the bed." So my grandfather, wanted to have the tie on, wasn't sure what he was getting into, so he is said to have lain on the bed, and the guy tied a perfect bow tie knot, and quite reasonably, my grandfather said, "Thank you. Why'd I have to lie down on the bed?" The guy said, "I'm an undertaker."
That is a cute story if it's true, but Bill Nye didn't know if it was, so permit me to apply Bill's worldview two ways to determine whether or not Grandpa's story is actually true. Bill, if you wanted to prove that your grandfather actually had his bow tie tied by an undertaker, what science would you use to go back in time and do that? What lab experiment? What blood test might you run? I can't think of a scientific experiment you could use. Hey, wait, you could go back and check the hotel records. Did an undertaker stay next to your grandpa? That would give us a clue, but that's detective work. That isn't science. You cannot determine whether or not that story was true based on science. You can do it by playing Columbo, but not by playing a scientist. Furthermore, you couldn't tell me what color pants the chef was wearing that day. Now, maybe if you had a picture, you could observe it and say they were black pants, but you can't use science to determine what color pants the hotel chef was wearing that day. You don't know how high the heels were on the maid who was cleaning up your grandpa's bedroom, unless, of course, you had a picture. Otherwise, what lab experiment would you use to prove how high her stilettos were? And yet, that's precisely what he does when it comes to his worldview. He claims that we can go back in time and figure out how things lived, bred, and died. And we can't. We can guess. We can put our faith in some of that guesswork, but we can't prove it with observational science. Permit me to apply his worldview to the story. I thought this is how he was going to share the story. After all, if he was going to be consistent, I thought with his evolutionary worldview, he would say that Grandpa laid down on his bed with his untied tie, and he laid there for millions of years, and then all of a sudden the thing was just tied all by itself. That is his worldview. That somehow all this stuff came from nowhere, got together, it blew up with a lot of energy where we don't know of that origin, and it got all organized and beautiful over millions and billions of years. It doesn't happen with a bow tie. It doesn't happen with our planet.